Goeienaand, good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world. And this is another huge shout out to Fiona. And she's had a lot of questions in the comments below the earlier video about witch doctors. So she's added a bit more meat to the bone, if I can put it that way. This is what she says in her latest article. Scott, I would like to circle back to witch doctors, as there have been so many questions and discussions about their merits as herbal healers on the forum. What has not been mentioned or has been overlooked, or maybe people are just not aware of it, is the cruelty to often endangered wild animals which goes on in the name of muti. On a hot summer afternoon, while my parents had their obligatory after-lunch snooze, our nanny, Evelina, took us right down to the lawn below the tennis court and out of earshot if we squabbled. She sat us down on either side of her bulky body in the shade of a big oak tree. Shh, listen, she said. Can you hear that? She looked up, head tilted to one side, her eyes squinting into the glare. We sat still and gazed up into the harshly brilliant blue sky. Can you hear it? She asked again. I could detect a shrill, shrieking call from far above, so high that I couldn't see anything, not even a speck. What is it? I asked nervously. It was a call I knew well, but not who made it. That's Mkwazi. You must be quiet and sit still now, or he'll come and take you away. The thing screamed again and again, but I still couldn't see anything. A pair of dragons live in a nest at the top of that tall, dead yellowwood tree in the bush, struck by lightning years ago. They snatch up small children to take back to feed to their young. Who's Mkwazi? I was feeling slightly panicky now. My sister was whimpering with fright and had clambered into Evelina's blue uniformed lap, pulling the white pinafore over her head. Naturally, I was determined to find out and possibly see this dragon for myself. So the following morning I enlisted 2 of my Zulu friends to accompany me into the thick indigenous forest to investigate. They were extremely reluctant to come along, but I'd given them a little information and chivied them relentlessly until they caved in and agreed to come along. As we climbed the steep and slippery path, we could hear a troop of samango monkeys chattering further down the valley, unaware that we were nearby. They were foraging in the treetops for insects. It was unusual to come across them there, because unlike vervet monkeys who preferred the bush, samangos spent most of their time in our wattle plantations, feasting on resin, which they extracted by tearing off strips of bark with their sharp canine teeth. They were a bit of a pest, my father said, because they could kill off quite a few trees by ring-barking them in this way. We're nearly there. I stopped to wait for Jabu and Bongi to catch up and to listen for any other sounds. We sat on a moss boulder to rest and catch our breath. Shh! The trees up there, I pointed up the slope to where a massive trunk rose out of the surrounding undergrowth. Come on! Crouching and bent double, we crept closer. Bushes and brushwood gave way to the thick, soft moss at the base of the towering tree. There was a lot of debris in the form of dry sticks and clumps of dead moss lying around, bits that had fallen from the nest over the years, whitish objects that lay amongst them. I stopped, and Jabu and Bongi bumped into me from behind. We squatted there, unsure now. I looked back at them. They stared at me, the whites of their eyes bright in the gloom of the dark forest. They were waiting for me to make the next move. Holding my breath, I crawled forward slowly and reached out to touch the round, off-white object lying in the moss. I picked it up. It was light, hard, and cold. With it in my hand, I scrambled back on my backside into the undergrowth where my friends were hiding. I looked closely at the thing in my hand. It was a skull. With a shriek of terror, I dropped it hurriedly, and wiping my hand frantically on my shorts, I backed away from it, my heart thudding furiously in my throat. Jabu and Bongi had run a little way back down the path, and were now cowering behind a mossy boulder. After crouching on the ground for a few minutes to catch my breath and waiting for the churning in my stomach to subside, I crept forward and looked at the skull again. It was small, about half the size of my own head, and still had the jaw attached. It was lying on its side now, with two gaping eye sockets staring at me. I shuddered. I sat and gazed at it while I thought about what I was going to do with this unexpected find. I wanted to take it home to show Dad, but I didn't want to touch it again. I looked back to the moss at the base of the dead yellowwood tree. About half a dozen similar-sized skulls lay there, and lots of long, curved objects the same colour, which now that I looked at them more carefully had to be ribs and leg bones from the same creature whose skull I'd picked up. There were other skulls too, smaller, flatter, and more as if they'd come from a very small dog, as well as a scattering of smaller bones of all shapes. Then I had a brainwave and stood up and took my shorts off. There was no sign of Bongi and Jabu, but I knew they were still hiding behind the rock. I took my brooks, my panties off, and pulled my shorts quickly back on. After that I broke a twig off the nearest bush and used it to roll the skull carefully into my brooks, which I held open like a bag. I picked them up with the skull inside and held the leg and waist holes in my fist. Now I could carry the skull home without actually touching it. "Wazani bo! Come on," I called, and they crept out cautiously from their hiding place, their eyes fastened on the makeshift bag I was holding. "Leave it there," pleaded Bongi. "We don't want to take it away. What if Nkwazi follows us and wants it back?" "There's no meat left on it, that's why he threw it away," I said airily. I actually had no idea what Nkwazi would do. But bravado is my middle name, and I sauntered nonchalantly off down the mountainside, with my Brooks bag and my companions treading carefully a safe distance behind me. By the time we reached their hut, I knew there was some sort of uproar going on. I could hear Evelina calling for me, her voice echoing through the valley and bouncing back at us. Lakashia hurried anxiously out of her doorway as she saw us. "You must run home quickly, Nkosana. Evelina has been calling for you all morning." "Look," I said, and held up my brooks, letting them fall open to reveal the skull. "Aye!" she screamed and ran back into her hut. "Throw it away! It's Mtagati!" She wailed from the dark interior where she was cowering. I rewrapped it, and saying goodbye to Bongi and Jabu, who'd run into their home the minute their mother screamed, and were hiding behind her, I padded along the road past the sheds towards her house and Evelina's voice. She was standing at the back gate, her hand up to shield her eyes from the midday sun. "How?" she shouted when she saw me coming up the road. "Where have you been? I told you to be back for breakfast, and it's nearly lunchtime. Nkosikazi will be very cross with me if she finds out that you missed breakfast. What have you been doing?" she scolded as I approached. "Look," I said, and held up my parcel again, revealing the skull. The effect on Evelina was even more dramatic than on Lacacia. She jumped backwards with her eyes popping out of her head like a cartoon character. If she had had a hat on instead of her white doek, it would have flown off her head. "Haibo!" she screamed, and turned and ran towards the kitchen as fast as her plump legs would carry her. Ben Masango and Makaya came out of the kitchen doorway to see what the screaming was about. "Umtagati!" she cried. "Nkazan has brought Umtagati." Umtagati is witchcraft, or evil. They stopped in their tracks, and instead of going back into the kitchen, the two men bolted towards the chanin, the thatch hut that served as a laundry. As they darted inside, Evelina barreled past them and thundered into the hut, her bare feet pounding on the wooden floor. They slammed the door shut, and Evelina appeared at the small window to shout, "Susu lento, take that thing away," just before she shut the window with a bang and started to wail. I stood there on the back lawn, holding the skull, astonished at this reaction. I knew I could get a satisfactory result from the servants and farm labourers by sidling up to them with my hand behind my back and suddenly whip out a live chameleon. We talked about chameleons in the last video. They'd scream and jump and run away, but only far enough to shout at me to put the thing back in the bush. But this behaviour was unprecedented. I'd only ever once sprung a chameleon on Ben, because after he had recovered from his fright, he picked up a carving knife and chased me out of the kitchen with a terrible bellow, leaving me feeling quite alarmed. Now he was cowering in the chanin, as terrified as the others were. I walked into the kitchen and through the house to the front veranda where Mum and Dad were sitting, drinking their pre-lunch gins. I held out the skull to Dad. "Look what I found," he said. He took it carefully and turned it over in his hands, inspecting it with great interest. "It's a monkey skull, a vervet, and quite a big one, judging from the size. Where did you find it?" "Under that big yellowwood tree in the bush, the one with Inquasi's nest at the top." "That's not Inquasi's nest," he said. "That's a crowned eagle's nest. They eat monkeys, dussies, rock hyrax, and even blue duikers. There's always been a pair of them raising a chick there. That peewit call we hear all day long is a chick calling for its parents to bring more food. It takes them 2 years to raise one chick." "So it's only a monkey skull?" I was a little bit disappointed. Why did the servants take off screaming like that when they saw it? They probably thought it was a child's skull. They believe that Inquasi, the fish eagle, snatches small children and carries them off to feed to their young. Dad was on his second pink gin and was feeling expansive. But Inquasi nests in trees up in the place where the best fishing is, not down here in the bush. They were shouting Umtagati as they ran away, I explained. "Ah, that means they definitely thought it was the skull of a child, one who was killed for muti, a spell. There's some bad witchcraft that goes on around these parts, and now and again an innocent Zulu child gets murdered, and parts of him are chopped up for muti against an enemy. Other parts get buried in certain places. They're a bunch of bloody savages, really," he said, and took a sip from his glass. "I saw lots of bones under the nest," I said. "Would those be duiker bones?" "Probably. I'll tell you what. When I've had my afternoon snooze, we'll walk up there and take a proper look at the ground under the nest. I was planning to go into the bush anyway to look for snares. Those bastards can't resist putting snares in or hunting bushbuck, and the tiny little impiti buck, the rare little blue duikers, which are the size of a fox terrier, with their easy good oi, or easy good oi. I'm sorry, guys, I don't get that word right. Anyway, with their easy goody oi, African mongrel dogs, no matter how much free meat they're given. "Yes, please," I said. "I'd love to look at all those bones," and skipped off to my lunch, only to find the kitchen deserted. Mum called me back. "Don't forget your brooks. You must give them to Leisha to wash." The gin had mellowed her too. Dad added dryly, "And you'd better tell the servants that's only a monkey skull, or you won't get any lunch." I walked down the kitchen steps and over to the chanin. "It's only the skull of Nkau, the vervet monkey," I called through the closed door. The Zulu name for cow is onomatopoeic and is exactly how vervets sound when they give their alarm call. "Cow!" There was silence, and then the door opened a crack. An anxious brown face appeared. "Are you sure?" asked Ben. "Yes, Nkasan. Says it's Nkau's skull." The door creaked open slowly, and the 3 house servants came out cautiously, still not quite sure whether this was one of my tricks. "Where is it?" "I left it on the veranda with Mkasani," I said. "Can I have my lunch now?" With a lot of dark muttering, Ben stomped crossly up the steps into the kitchen to dish up lukewarm mince and mash for me. Micaiah replaced his red fez, which had fallen to the ground in his panic, and went back to laying the dining room table. And Evelina went off to call Leisha, who was looking after little sister, somewhere down by the grass tennis court. While I'd been at the Centre for Rehabilitation of Wildlife in Durban, where I was living and working as a wildlife veterinary nurse from 1994 until 1997, and hand-raising a baby white rhino, I saw firsthand the utterly sickening cruelty meted out to wildlife in the name of muti. In all the time I was there, never once did an African bring in a sick or injured wild animal, but there was a steady stream of concerned white Durban residents who brought in animals and birds that had been mutilated while still alive and then callously discarded anywhere. Live owls in particular were regularly brought in with both feet amputated and suffering terribly. Africans believed that they had part of an owl. It would give them perfect vision at night time. Beautiful spotted eagle owls, wood owls, and even the delicate tiny little white-faced scops owl came to us all with their feet cut off. We would euthanize them immediately to put them out of their misery. The witch doctors capitalize on this superstition, trapping the owls using snares, and proceed to chop off their feet and throw the tormented, still-living animals away. Monkeys, too, are a target for muti. The belief is that a body part of a monkey will give Africans cunning and agility. Again, they were regularly brought in by concerned white people who had found them in a terrible state. The Sangomas trapped the monkeys, in our case the vervet monkeys, as they are common and prevalent in KwaZulu-Natal. These poor creatures come in with all four paws amputated and in agony. There was no choice but to euthanize them as well, and as quickly as possible to alleviate their pain. Our most heartbreaking case was a very young brown lemur, which was smuggled into the harbour on a boat from Madagascar, to be kept, I suppose, as a pet. The beautiful little creature had managed to escape from the smugglers' flat on the Durban beachfront by falling out of the window and landing on the street. An African had scooped it up and taken it to the witch doctor to sell for a very high price. That was because it was a strange animal, not indigenous to South Africa, and would probably possess many and very valuable magical powers. He was found by a white Durban resident who rushed him up to us before he bled to death. The Sangoma, or Umtagati, had cut off both back feet, one front paw at the elbow, and his tail. How he was still alive was a miracle. There was nothing we could do for him except put him to sleep. Vultures, particularly the white-backed vulture, which is now so scarce that it is hovering on the red data list, particularly in South Africa, and our national bird, the crowned crane, were also brought in. Africans regularly put poisoned mealie kernels out for them to eat, and once they're dead, hand them over to Sangomas for high-priced muti. The vultures are supposed to enable one to eat rotting meat or carrion, and the crowned crane is prized for its amazing and beautiful feathered crown, which Sangomas like to wear as decorative ornaments. Even the blue crane is dying out as collateral damage when they get picked up with the poisoned kernels. The vultures are killed by poisoned meat deliberately left out for them, and the black-backed jackals to eat. We only managed to rescue 1 or 2 vultures by force-feeding them with a charcoal-based solution, which helps to absorb some of the poison in the system. It took days of constant hard work to get what few we could rescue to recovery. But 90% of the birds brought to us never make it. The African use organophosphate poison, which is a deadly killer and is almost impossible to treat successfully. The other issue is how many wild animals are killed by Africans, particularly Zulus, for ornaments. Chiefs like to wear leopard skin, another animal which is rapidly becoming endangered through habitat loss and poaching. Mangosuthu Buthelezi, the politician and Zulu tribal leader who founded the Inkatha Freedom Party, or IFP, and was chief minister of the KwaZulu-Bantustan until 1994, loves to parade around covered in leopard skin. Similarly, King Goodwill Zwelithini, the Zulu king, does the same. This, of course, encourages poaching of leopards. The other animals which fall prey to Zulus are the shy, nocturnal, and very beautiful large spotted genets, as well as the banded mongooses, black-backed jackals, and inevitably baboons and monkeys. These are caught and killed simply for their skins and worn as loincloths by Sangomas, Amatagati, as well as ordinary tribesmen and women. Also, due to habitat loss and city development, these enchanting little creatures are being decimated. There isn't very much bush left for them to hide in, safely away from the poachers. Inevitably, wire snares are used to catch them, and this cruel method of trapping animals whereby the only means of escape is for the creature to chew off a foot or very slowly be strangled to death. The Africans see as their right to take and kill as many wild animals and birds as they like, having no thought to the future when there won't be wild creatures left alive. I went to Sangoma myself when I needed help in a very urgent matter. While I'd been raising the baby white rhino, at the beginning, there was a flurry of excitement from the press. Local television stations like Carte Blanche and even CNN, reporters and cameramen flocked to the rehabilitation centre to film me feeding this little baby in his boma. It was always me, as I lived on the premises and was inevitably on duty when the press arrived. CNN produced a film clip which circled the world for several years. As a result, the other two much younger nurses, aided and abetted by the manager of the centre, began to target me out of jealousy, bullying me and even sabotaging my work. I never dared leave any of my baby animals alone in the clinic on my days off it, but took them all back to my hut, where I could look after them myself. My colleagues couldn't be trusted, and I wouldn't put it past them to neglect my babies by not feeding them, allowing them to die, and then blaming me. My job was hanging by a thread, so I went into Durban, where I knew of a witch doctor. I walked in and sat down, and she glanced at me. "You have 2 sons," she said immediately. "They live very far away." I was fairly astonished. She knew nothing about me, but indeed I had 2 sons, one at the University of Cape Town and the other in London. She could not have known that. And then she said, "People are jealous of you at your work." I explained my predicament to her, and she listened very carefully. Then she handed me a small paper bag with some pink powder in it. "For 3 nights in a row, put some of this powder in the water when you bath. The problem will go away." I was very sceptical, but paid her, took my powder back to the hut where I lived on the premises, and followed her instructions to the letter. A few days later, the manager gave me a warning letter, suspending me from all public duties for a month. I was still to carry on working around the clock, but not allowed to lead school groups on tours around the centre, teaching them not to buy baby animals from Africans, selling them on the roadside. This practice is prevalent, and it's very hard to drive past a black man who's waving, for instance, a tiny black vervet monkey at the side of the road, buying it for a few rand and taking it home. The Africans can go into the bush, find a troop of monkeys, some of which are mothers carrying babies, and catch 1 or 2 by shooting the mother. They take the babies, which could only be a few days old, to sell on the roadside. It is fairly easy to hunt down a troop of banded mongooses, and by chasing the troop around, snatch up any babies which get left behind. If the infant survives, they are kept as pets until the inevitable happens. Adult monkeys are dirty, dangerous, and destructive. Fully grown banded mongooses and meerkats, like all wild animals, cannot be tamed and bite ferociously. Rather than being released back into the bush, where they would never survive alone, which happened to plenty of them, the luckier animals would be brought to the centre and handed to us to deal with. We had a system whereby we formed a troop out of individuals, some adults which had come in stunned, having been hit by a car but survived, and lots of babies. After a year, the troop was fully integrated by the adults, teaching the babies how to survive in the wild. Then we would release them back into the game reserve, sanctioned by the Natal Parks Board. I was stunned, as I'd done nothing wrong to deserve the suspension. Now she's talking about when, after taking the powder or putting the powder in the bath for 3 days, she was suspended. So I was stunned, as I'd done nothing wrong to deserve the suspension. So I drove up to Pietermaritzburg, where the chairman of the board of directors of the Rehabilitation Centre, which is a charity-run organisation, lived. I explained everything to him and added a lot of other bad practices that were going on, perpetrated by the lazy 18-year-old nurses who wanted to get away quickly on a Friday afternoon and would skip feeding animals to save time. Just for one example, and another unpleasant thing that were going on. sometimes perpetrated by the manager himself. By the end of the week, the board of directors had fired the manager and one of the nurses who had been particularly destructive. This muti had apparently worked extremely well. I was safe in my job again. And that's the end of this article that Fiona's written. What I get from it is clearly that this practice of cutting off the paws of different animals. Now, just this year, just this month, over 10 lions have been poisoned and had their paws cut off. And we've reported on this, and I know there have been a lot of reports about this, but this gives you the background to why this is happening in South Africa. It's all tied up with witch doctors, mtagata, or the evil stuff, the witchcraft, which is practiced widely by the Zulu population. All right, guys, please remember to subscribe to be kept informed. Ring the bell for the updates. Please like this video, please share this video, and above all, please stay safe.